Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This is NAB Show Live.
Ryan Salazar here with NAB Show Live and Broadcast Beat magazine. We've got a special guest. She's Broadcast Beat's science and technology journalist, the one and only Janet West. How you doing, Janet?
I'm doing fine, Ryan. How are you?
Doing great. So we wanted to chat with you in our pre-NAB series about sustainability in the broadcast and telecom industry. So go ahead and elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, it's one of the issues that really isn't addressed as seriously as I'd like it. And there are lots of issues. And if we take, for example, President Obama stated recently that there's no challenge that poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. And you probably know, Ryan, that back in December, COP21, 195 countries met in Paris to try and look at what they could do to stop this 2-degree global temperature rise. But perhaps what I should do briefly is to say what we actually mean by sustainability, because it relates to many impacts, both energy, social impacts, resource availability, and climate change. And, you know, if we're not serious about it, we could have one or two of the following scenarios. For example, there may be adequate renewable energy available, but there may not be enough resources to continue making products. We might sort of ignore things and carry on contributing to climate temperature rise, but then we might not have put a strategy in to cope with increasing floods and fires. And then on a more social issue, we've got an increasingly addicted society to communicating with devices. What's going to happen if all we do is communicate with devices and we have severe climate change and the lights go out? So there are lots of issues, and businesses in the broadcast and telecoms field have to put this in their business model.
And Janet, what are the most critical issues that the industry must consider besides energy?
Well, I think one of them is that they must start making products that add value to human existence. Because, you know, we see an awful lot of products, whether it's in our exhibits or at the CES, that quite frankly are useless and use and waste a lot of limited resources. And secondly, we've got to consider downstream carbon.
Janet, what is a downstream carbon?
Well, Ryan, you know, a lot of companies have no idea what happens to their products after the point of sale. So downstream carbon actually relates to the energy and the resulting carbon emissions that the industry creates when it pours product onto the market. And particularly when it pours product onto the market and then encourages more and more content absorption and purchasing more and more devices. So a product's impact after it leaves the original manufacturer is all the way down the value chain. Now, one company, for example, might market a new product that's smaller, uses less energy, but then it encourages multiple device purchase. So on the one hand, you're making something to save energy, but then asking people to buy a lot more. The other issue is that if we take a computer or a smartphone, you know, the energy isn't just what's required to charge the device. And most people I talk to have no idea of the extent of energy using social media, uploading photos, or streaming 4K. And if you think there are 300 hours of video uploaded per minute on YouTube these days.
Janet, we rarely see environmental messages when we go to industry shows and conventions and things. Is there a reluctance there?
Well, do you know, Ryan, I think what it is, it boils down in some ways to lack of understanding of the big picture, but it also might be fear that by doing something might affect profits. You know, I find our industry somewhat blinkered. If we take an industry like the pharmaceutical industry, they have a lot of serious guidelines on testing the drugs and the impact of drugs on humans before they actually get on the market. But who in the telecoms and broadcasting industry is testing the impact on resources or social dynamics? Take, for example, drones. They just crept into the market without even thinking about the dangerous issues. And as a result, we've now had to bring in a lot of new legislation to cope with some of the issues. An addiction to devices is a growing problem. I think you can talk to any parent about that. And schools are reporting children incapable of conversations when parents have overused smartphones and tablets as babysitters. But project this a few years in the future. Do companies actually want managers to negotiate in tweet speak? So we've got a dilemma. We've got an industry, on the one hand, we want to embrace the environment and leave it unharmed for future generations, but it's technologically driven, and shareholders want to maximize their profit. So there's a little bit of a dilemma.
Well, Janet, so I wouldn't think that technology could be stifled, right?
Oh, no, and of course we shouldn't stifle technological development, but I really think we should monitor it better and the impact of what we're creating. And what we have to consider is that we've got a growing population and developing countries aspiring to have the lifestyles of the West. So that means even more products, even more resources, and even more energy. Now, the internet is good. We all know that. We couldn't live without it. And it can reduce travel. Smart homes can better monitor consumer use. But overall use and data centers to support it is growing. Now, earlier this year, we lost that rock icon. I used to love him, David Bowie. And in 1999, he commented on the internet as an alien life form. And he said the potential of what the internet would do on society would be both good and bad. He believed we were on the cusp of something he described as exhilarating, yet terrifying. And I think we've seen over the last few years a paradigm shift in the way users and content providers interact. So on the good side, we're seeing things like online education in areas that couldn't previously afford a teacher. And yet on the bad side, we're having to cope with cybercrime on a daily basis. Our shopping habits are monitored. And I can guarantee that if I book a flight, my email webpage will offer me a hotel in that destination the next time I log on. We can get insulted on Twitter. Our children can be bullied. But the one thing the internet can't do, which will be an interesting challenge for this industry, is that it can't give us more than 24 hours in a day. So sure, we need technological development. Man was made to develop technology. But why not focus more on technology that adds value to human existence and shareholders, and make sure there are no damaging effects before the products get on the market, rather than allowing technological development that is solely focused on profits?
Do people really understand the sustainability issues affecting our industry? I guess that's broadcast, motion picture, the entertainment industry.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, Ryan. Truthfully, there are so many sustainability buzzwords that many people often get confused. And it's not just in our industry, it's in all industries. And what they don't often get is the connection between their actions, their impacts, and their corporate and personal goals. For example, you'll have some people saying, well, recycling is really important. But that is not the only way to avoid damaging biodiversity. And other people will say, well, as long as we've got renewables, that'll be fine. But you're not going to put wind turbines in an area that's not windy. It doesn't make sense. And then there are some rather silly assumptions. I was speaking to an executive of a data center and asked them what forms of energy they were using, because I knew they had access to a lot of geothermal, solar, both photovoltaic and solar concentration. And their response was, oh, well, we use a lot of natural gas. After all, it's natural. So perhaps understanding sustainability, we've got to use the right words, and perhaps natural gas should be called earth gas to avoid confusion, because after all, it's a fossil fuel and it still creates carbon dioxide. So we need a better education to make people, not just in this industry, but in all industries, understand sustainability.
Janet, so is sustainability compatible with current business models?
Well, not if the primary goal is financial, but adapting current business models definitely is possible. You know, Ryan, any company that has a sense of responsibility for its customers must, and many companies are making changes, but we can't expect governments around the world to fix floods, find scarce resources, or stop fires on acres of farmland. So industry and consumers have to change, and quite frankly, emigrating to Mars to start over, in my opinion, is going to be a little bit too late. But, one area that's requiring attention is e-waste. From a marketing point of view, think of, the business model. It makes sense to sell more boxes, and the more boxes you sell, hopefully the more profit you're going to make. But what happens to all those boxes that is discarded? Now, according to Electronics Talkback Coalition, 55 million tons of phones, TVs, smartphones, computers are thrown away every year. Now, put that in perspective. We've got 7 billion people on this planet. That's like every individual person is throwing away 20 kilos or 43 pounds of electronics. Now, Dell in 2014 realized this was a problem, so they have started making a computer from recycled electronics. Because what's driving this is the scarcity of precious metals combined with the growing cost of e-waste management. You know, there's also an issue that many of the raw materials that we need are only available in conflict areas in Africa, which raises a whole nother issue of social responsibility. So for companies to be sustainable, it's got to become a key part of their corporate strategy and their business model. But I'm going to be a bit positive. There are some interesting developments on the horizon for business models. If you take, you know, whether it's TVs, computers, or phones, they're full of chips and they're on silicon substrates. Well, when they get thrown onto landfill, they don't biodegrade. But there's work now that if you use cellulose nanofibrillated fiber, they biodegrade. So there's some help there. And on February the 1st this year, Microsoft have announced that they're looking into building data centers hundreds of feet below the surface of the oceans to hopefully minimize energy for cooling. Now that sounds interesting, but if we go back to the start of our conversation, I really wish people would look at the impact of their actions. So if Microsoft are going to put data centers below the oceans, are they going to carefully examine the side effects of artificially heating the oceans that are already increasing in temperature? And what impact will the sound from millions of hard drives whirring around have on sea life?
Well, Janet, that's quite an interesting argument there. That's quite amazing. I mean, I've never even heard of a data center being under the water. That's under the ocean. That's amazing. I mean, it's a technological feat in itself, but you're right. There are questions that should definitely be raised. So if there's a company that wants to, get serious about sustainability, what are the key benefits to them and their clients?
Well, there are quite a few. And, as they start their journey to corporate sustainability, increasingly they're going to find that staff will want to work for a company that are socially responsible. And for anyone who runs a business, reducing your staff churn rate has financial advantages. Now, additional financial savings can be made when sustainability gets addressed at the design stage. So a company, when they've got their R&D department, have to start thinking sustainably from that point and then throughout the value chain. If companies look at life cycle analysis of processes, it often leads to efficiencies such as sourcing materials from new locations, and quite often at a reduced cost. But one of the key things is that companies that start their sustainability business model now will be ready for future environmental legislation.
Again, that was Janet West, Broadcast Beat's own science and technology journalist, all the way in Hampshire, England. Janet, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
It was a lot of fun, Ryan, and I really look forward to meeting a lot of the broadcast industry specialists at NAB.